Hello and a warm welcome to our special live webinar from Zero Waste Scotland on behalf of the Scottish Government on the subject of tackling litter and fly tipping in Scotland. My name is Chris Morrison. I'm going to be your host for today, and I work in the energy and low carbon heat team here at Zero Waste Scotland. I'm delighted to be joined on this broadcast by our expert panelists who are here to share a bit more about the consultation that the Scottish Government are currently undertaking, as well as giving you the opportunity to ask any questions or views that you might have on this. Firstly, I'd like to introduce you to our panelists. So I'll ask them to introduce themselves, say who they are and where they're from, and we'll start with Kim. So over to you.
Hi there, my name's Kim Young and I lead on litter and fly tipping prevention at Zero Waste Scotland.
Thank you, Kim. Sarah, would you like to go next?
Hi, I'm Sarah Letzinger. I'm a policy officer in Scottish Government and I've been leading on the development of the National Litter and Fly Tipping Strategy.
Thank you, Sarah. Paul, would you like to go next?
My name's Paul Wallace and I'm the Campaigns and Social Innovation Manager for Keep Scotland Beautiful, and I lead on our national anti-litter campaigns.
Okay, thank you, Paul. And last but not least, Craig.
Hi, I'm Craig Fraser. I'm a policy officer in SEPA's National Waste Unit, leading on fly tipping.
Okay, thank you all. So before we move on to our question and answer panel session, Dr. Sarah Letzinger is going to provide us with a bit of background on the work that the Scottish Government is doing to tackle litter and fly tipping, and how your views will help shape a future strategy for Scotland. For those wishing to submit questions, they can submit via the social network they're viewing on. We cannot promise to get through all of them, but we'll ensure that we will respond to every post raised after the event. So over to you, Sarah.
Thanks. Can you go ahead and go to the next slide, please? So today I'm just going to give a little bit of a background to the National Litter and Fly Tipping Strategy, which is out for consultation. I'm going to go through some of the proposed actions that sit under the strategy to tackle litter and fly tipping. I'm probably not going to have time to go through all of them in a lot of detail, but I hope it gives a flavor of what we're proposing. I'll then briefly touch on sort of the next steps. Can you go to the next slide, please? Scotland's first national litter strategy was published in 2014, and a review was completed by a group of stakeholders after 5 years in 2019. The review outlines the actions that had taken place under the first national litter strategy, but it also outlined, I guess, good practice case studies, so what could be the focus of a new strategy. Around this time last year, Scottish Government committed to developing a new national litter and fly tipping strategy. The first litter strategy did have messages on fly tipping, but separating these as two distinct topics allows a different approach to be taken to each of these. The new strategy focuses on 3 key themes, and these are behavior change, services and infrastructure, and enforcement. So today I'm just going to talk about each of those themes and the actions sitting under them. Data and research is a really important part of the strategy, and it's something that cuts across each of these themes. There is also a marine litter strategy, which is currently being refreshed, and it's also available for consultation until the 23rd of March. We've proposed that the National Litter and Fly Tipping Strategy has a 6-year lifespan, and within the strategy, we've outlined actions as short, medium, and long term in regards to when they'll be completed. So under behavior change for litter, we hope to ensure that individuals and organizations have a greater awareness of the problems that are caused by litter and are motivated to behave responsibly. To do this, we've proposed to conduct research on behaviors that lead to littering and to use this information to develop a sustained national anti-littering behavior change campaign that can be delivered over a number of years. Next slide, please. Under services and infrastructure, we've set out some actions that we think will help to ensure that Scotland's services and infrastructure are fit for purpose, encourage responsible behaviour, and prioritise action that proactively prevents litter. We've proposed to improve the consistency of data collection, as understanding what materials litter is made up of and where it is happening is really important to be able to develop effective sort of policy interventions and targeted approach to preventing litter. We've also proposed to increase the use of citizen science. So this is data that's collected by the public, as this can help to support other data that's being collected. We have also proposed to establish an action focus group and to encourage collaboration between duty bodies and increase consistency in services across Scotland. We've proposed some actions to help to support community groups, and one of these is to create a litter hub to provide information to those that are involved in either picking litter or initiatives to help prevent it. Next slide, please. The final theme in this section is enforcement, and so we've set out a number of actions to help ensure that there is a strong and consistent enforcement model in Scotland. We first have proposed to conduct an evidence review of enforcement practices and use that information to help inform next steps. We've proposed to explore raising the fixed penalties, but also looking at alternative penalties. So this could include things like litter picks or compulsory education for those that are caught littering. The previous circular economy bill had consulted on littering, of creating powers to issue fixed penalties to a registered keeper of a vehicle who is caught littering, and this is something that we're looking to take forward. And finally, we've proposed to review and develop further guidance to help to support authorities that are involved in enforcement. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to move on to fly tipping and talk about some of the actions that sit under this section. So similarly, we've proposed some actions to help promote a positive behavior by improving fly tipping messaging, ensuring that individuals and businesses are confident in understanding their responsibilities and how to dispose of waste correctly. So again, we've proposed to conduct research on the behaviors that lead to fly tipping, and use this information to develop a sustained national anti-fly tipping behavior change campaign. And we've also proposed to create a single information point containing advice on how to dispose of commonly fly tipped materials, recognizing that there are different services available across Scotland, and to try and make this information easier to access. Next slide, please. Under services and infrastructure, we have proposed some actions to ensure that there is a resilient national framework which provides services that are effective for preventing fly tipping, but then also tackling it when it does occur. Once again, data collection is a really important part of this theme. As similar to litter, this data is needed to be able to develop policy that can help to prevent fly tipping. We've also proposed to review dumb dumpers, which is the national tool for citizen reporting of fly tipping incidents, as we want to ensure that there's a fit for purpose mechanism in place. We've proposed to explore the use of flexible and targeted approaches to waste disposal. So this could include things like mobile waste recycling centers or amnesties. We've established a fly tipping forum, and we've proposed using this to help to support information and best practice between those that are involved in preventing and enforcing fly tipping. And finally, we've proposed some actions to help to support private landowners, and this includes providing and updating guidance, exploring financial support mechanisms, and also looking at technology to help prevent fly tipping. Next slide, please. So finally, for enforcement, we've proposed actions to help ensure that there's a strong and consistent enforcement model that is fit for purpose and deters fly tipping. So we've also once again proposed to conduct an evidence review of enforcement practices and to use this information to help inform next steps. We've proposed to raise fixed penalties to maximum that's allowed under current legislation, and so that is raising them to £500 for those for fixed penalties that can be issued by local authorities and Loch Lomond and Trossachs National Park. We've also proposed to explore other tools that authorities can use to help enforce fly tipping. So this includes civil penalties, and we've proposed to develop further guidance on enforcement best practices. Next slide. So I hope that gives you a flavor of some of the actions that sit under the strategy. As I said, I didn't have time to go through all of them, but the consultation is available on the Citizen Space site, and it's going to be open until the 31st of March. The easiest way to respond is to do this online. And I would really encourage everyone to do this and give your views. It's really important in developing the strategy. None of the questions are compulsory, so you can go through and answer any that you feel are important to you. After the consultation closes, the responses will be analysed and published on the Scottish Government website, where permission has been given. We will also produce a consultation analysis report that will be published on the Scottish Government website as well. As I said, your responses are really important, and they will be used to shape the final strategy. We are hoping to publish over the final strategy in the summer, but it does depend on the responses that we receive. Thank you. And sorry, there is a consultation mailbox at nlfs@gov.scot where you can write in if you have any more questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Sarah, for that presentation and that overview regarding the strategy. So now we're going to move on to the question time, questions that we've got for our panelists. So we have a set of questions that were submitted prior to the webinar today. So we'll make a start with those. But for anyone who is watching just now live, you have the opportunity to submit any questions you have, and we'll kind of raise these to the panel as well. So to start with, how does the strategy differ from the previous one, and what did we learn from the work that has already happened? I wonder whether, Sarah, you could address that.
Yeah, no problem. So as I mentioned in my introduction, this strategy does separate litter and fly tipping into two distinct sections, recognizing that there are drivers behind this behaviors and will allow a different approach to be taken to them. However, inclusion of these two topics under one strategy is important, as it recognizes that there is interconnection between these issues. Also, many of the partners and stakeholders that are involved in finding a solution are the same, as well as the three themes that we are looking at. The review of Scotland's first national strategy concluded that while progress had been made, the solution lies in a clear strategy built on shared ownership and a collaborative approach. The new strategy will outline ownership of these actions to help deliver this, and there is a focus on sort of creating a consistency and encouraging collaborative working between partners. Thanks.
Thank you, Sarah. And so for the strategy, what's the timeline? Could you give a quick summary with regards to that for the strategy? So when it will be published and the actions taken for that? Sarah, could you answer that?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, we are hoping to publish in the summer, but it is subject to the responses that we get to the consultation. And we're looking at a 6-year timeframe for the strategy. We've outlined within the consultation sort of when these actions will be completed, and we're looking at sort of a short, medium, and long-term timeframes. So that's 2, 4, and 6 years respectively. And this is something that we'll take into consideration as we develop the final strategy.
Okay, thank you for that, Sarah. So I've got a couple of questions that relate specifically to litter. So in the strategy is planning for it to be a separate thing from fly tipping. So the first one is we see so much litter, sadly, on the verges of the roads with people throwing things from car windows. What are the plans to address that? I wonder whether, Paul, if you'd be able to answer that one.
Thanks, Chris. I think we can all agree that roadside litter is a really visible manifestation of the challenges we face as a country with regard to litter and littering behaviour. In some of the research that we conducted pre-pandemic, 91% of people living in Scotland agreed that roadside litter created a negative perception of our country. And the reality of roadside litter is it's difficult and dangerous to clear. It's also very costly to clear. And we know from our own work that there is real frustration in communities to tackle these issues. And when we go out around the country, working with groups and helping and supporting them with litter picks and all sorts of different settings, that frustration with roadside litter is one of the most common themes that we have. I think the strategy will help to deal with that in a number of ways. I think Sarah's already mentioned the importance of research and data. Research will help us understand better the people who are engaging in roadside littering and enable us to target them with appropriate interventions. But data will also help us to target hotspots and put in place interventions at particular sites. And we've all seen the litter, for example, on slip roads, on motorways, for example, or near retail parks. And we need to work better at those sites to tackle the problem. I think, as Sarah has mentioned, collaboration is one of the key themes mentioned in the consultation paper. And we all need to work better together to tackle these issues, both in terms of the legacy of roadside litter, the litter that's sitting on our roadsides, and stopping it happening in the future. And I think finally, the strategy and the consultation paper mentions education. Education and targeting those groups who we know indulge in this behaviour is crucial, and we need to get smarter at that. Overall, we all have a role to play in tackling roadside litter as consumers and how we consume and how we dispose of our waste, retailers in terms of how they package products and how they sell them, and in terms of councils and other public agencies in terms of how these things are tackled. But the strategy will hopefully provide a solid platform for us to tackle what is one of the most annoying, I think, issues of roadside litter. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for that, Paul. So packaging, I guess, can also make a big proportion of the litter that we find, either on the roads or elsewhere, in cleanups. So how can producers, so those that make the packaging, and the businesses selling the items that are be made more accountable? Kim, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, so the first thing I would say is that data is one of the most important things here. Is we need to know exactly what the litter looks like, what materials are being littered, and so that we know that items are packaging or other types of litter. So when we're talking about packaging, that's anything that contains an item you've bought. So it could be a bottle, it could be wrapping, it could be a bag, it could be a cardboard box. So anything like that, that is all classed as packaging. And some of the work that's going on at the moment that has actually been informed by the data that we've managed to collect in the past includes extended producer responsibility, or EPR as it's commonly known as. And the idea behind EPR, well, the work that's happening there at the moment is we're working, or Scottish Government is working with the other nations in the UK to encourage producers to basically take more responsibility through increasing the reusability and recyclability of packaging, but then also contributing to the cost of when that packaging does become waste, how is that waste dealt with? And then, of course, if it ends up as litter, dealing with that litter as well. So basically, kind of closing that loop and ensuring the producers that produce that waste in the first place are actually contributing. But of course, it's local authorities that tend to end up having to deal with it, whether it's waste in bins or otherwise, or actually just waste that's been littered. The other area of work that's happening at the moment is Scotland's deposit return scheme, which hopefully a lot of people have heard about. That goes live on in August 2023, and the deposit return scheme will focus on glass and plastic bottles, and also glass and plastic drinks bottles, I should say, and also drinks cans, which are obviously they're items of packaging, but they're commonly used when people are out and about, so can often get littered. So the idea behind the deposit return scheme is that each of those items will have a 20p deposit attached to them. So when somebody buys them, they'll pay that extra 20p. But if they take the item back for recycling, then they will get their 20p back. So it gives these items a value and encourages people to do something with the items rather than just, tossing them aside. So it should encourage behaviour change. And we're also, ourselves and the other organisations involved in the strategy are working with retailers across Scotland as well. It's become more involved in the problem of litter and within their own grounds, but also wider. So there's a lot of retailers in Scotland will be getting involved in the deposit return scheme and encouraging people to bring items back to them for recycling.
Okay, thanks for that, Kim. So lots of stuff that's happening with regards to that kind of area, which is good to see. So a question now that relates to kind of education, and Paul, you mentioned a little bit about that in your previous answer. There needs to be more education for all ages to stop people littering. Is there a plan to tackle this, and how will that target groups that we know litter a lot? I wonder whether, Paul, you could come back as well.
Thanks, Chris. I think it's clear that education and changing behaviour is fundamental to tackling litter and littering behaviour in Scotland. I think the consultation paper recognises that issue, and it also recognises that education needs to be delivered on a broad basis across generations at a community level. I think there's a common misconception that we quite often hear out there that if only children and young people would stop dropping litter, everything would be fine. And I think the reality and the data shows that it's all generations who litter, and we all have to take responsibility. So I think we need to move away from this idea that school-based education is the answer to all of our problems around litter. At present, we do a lot of work in school-based settings, and that does have a positive impact. But beyond that, there isn't a consistent approach to education across the country, and we need to address that. I think the consultation paper and the work that we've done with communities across the country recognises that we need a broad-based education programme at a community level that looks at issues of littering behaviour and how you tackle it. And part of that is about building knowledge and capacity in local communities to help them deal with problems at a local level, to give them the confidence to engage, for example, with the local council or local retailers or local businesses, using tools, for example, like citizen science, as Sarah mentioned. But also, we need to be able to target that at specific audiences and recognise that there are ways to reach some of those audiences. For example, working online, using social media to reach particular groups. And we also have to listen to those groups about how they want to be communicated with as well. We do know this approach works. We do know that in our work with communities across Scotland, we work with over 200 community groups, that kind of education approach does work. And we're currently piloting a programme of education with Glasgow City Council in Glasgow that will deal with some of these very issues. So I think education is fundamental, and we need to get a consistent programme in place across the country.
Okay. Thanks for that, Paul. It's really interesting to kind of hear. So we have a few questions that relate specifically to fly tipping, so we'll just kind of go on to that just now. So taking waste to household waste recycling centres can be really challenging, and many councils, charge for uplift of bulky items. If these services were more easily accessed, people would be less likely to fly tip. Will the strategy be able to address these issues? Craig, would you be able to give some thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I think it's an interesting point around what are the barriers to people disposing of waste correctly, and whether any of them are tied into how household recycling centres operate. I think certainly at the start of the pandemic, we saw a peak in the reporting of incidents, which could certainly be tied into household recycling centres being unable to open as a result of the pandemic. At times are being restricted in their opening hours, and tie that in with people potentially clearing out their houses, as well as people being around about their local area more often. We did see a spike in reports. And I think as we've kind of coming out of the pandemic, I think it's interesting to see whether restricted opening hours or whether booking systems or anything like that do still have an impact, and whether bulky uplift charges have an impact as well. And I think that's definitely a valuable bit of research to be done in that area. In defence of local authorities, I think some of the bulky uplifts are perceived to be bigger than they actually are in some cases. Certainly in some local authorities, the prices can be cheaper than going private. And I think that's, again, something to be looked at as to whether we're too quick to jump to that scenario, that it's an expensive thing to get rid of it. But I think there's definitely a bit of research to be done on that. But ultimately, none of it would result in it being acceptable for a householder to fly tip the waste. And I think that's kind of what it comes back to. I think the strategy will help. I think some of the points that Sarah outlined earlier around looking at alternative ways of getting the waste, I guess, mobile household recycling centres, and mention of that, learning from local authorities' experience in running these services and how that can potentially be applied across the board, looking at potential amnesties, and even looking at that single information point for householders around how to dispose of their waste. I think all these things kind of tie in together to provide a better range and a better understanding of what services are out there, how they impact on different things.
Thanks for that, Craig. So we'll move on. Just a question on what can be done to help private landowners who are constantly having waste dumped in their land and have to clear it. So those who own land and have waste dumped in their lands, what can be done to help them? Kim, would you like to share some thoughts on this?
Yeah, so we are aware that private landowners often are the victims of fly tipping, and often out in rural areas, farmers and estate owners are often targeted for fly tipping, particularly in gateways at the sides of roads and that sort of thing. So that's something we are keen to work with private landowners to assist with. Again, data is something that's really important, because while we work with the likes of National Farmers Union and Scottish Land and Estates to try and gather information about where the problems are, it's often anecdotal. So one of the things that we're keen to do under this strategy is to work with private landowners to get more consistent data, so that we do have a better understanding of that. And until we have that understanding, it's hard to have a kind of sort of policy intervention to make any big changes. But I think in terms of what is happening at the moment and the kind of the changes that can be made, I think working together. So when it comes to fly tipping on private land, it's not the responsibility of a local authority. The law is quite clear there that local authorities, it's their own land that they're responsible for, not private land. However, local authorities can often work with a private landowner to assist them. And we also have the likes of the police and other organisations. So encouraging different organisations to work together, I think, is really important. And the likes of SPARC, the Scottish Partnership Against Rural Crime, has shown that in certain areas where there are local SPARC groups, this has worked really well. We've got some really good examples of where this has worked really positively. And we also have some local authorities who have kind of stepped up and decided, right, we're going to try and make a difference here. And for example, Perth and Kinross Council have put a fund in place for private landowners in their area, who can basically apply for money to either have fly tipping removed or to put interventions in place, such as gates or whatever's required to try to keep fly tippers out. So there are different things we can do, and we are actively working with private landowners, to try and make an improvement there. But as I mentioned at the start, data is what we really need to ensure that we're doing the right thing, we're doing it in the right place, and we're tackling the right materials.
Thanks for that, Kim. A question now that might relate to both litter and fly tipping around kind of prosecution. So hardly anyone gets caught or prosecuted for litter and fly tipping offences. So it doesn't seem to stop people doing it. How will the strategy look to address this, so the issue around prosecutions? I wonder if, Craig, if you'd like to share some thoughts on.
Yeah, so it's a challenging one. I think we'd all sit here a little bit frustrated around the number of prosecutions or fines that have been issued for fly tipping. I think a big part of it, we can't deny, is the lack of evidence at times to take forward some of these things. So it's great when the evidence is there in terms of being able to tie back to a business, to an individual who's fly tipped the material, but so often that isn't the case, and it does become a lot more challenging to take forward your kind of effective enforcement action against that. And I think even when there is evidence, there's certainly been frustrations around being able to take that forward to say a prosecution at the end of the day. And I think that's a recognition of the court systems and how we're having to battle against more serious offences for limited court time. I think a recognition of that. One thing I would say that fines and prosecutions are one aspect of our enforcement toolkit. There are a range of them, and it's really about behaviour change. And I think ultimately enforcement itself is only one part of it. We do need to focus on the prevention itself and stopping the material getting into these people. But I think the other side of it is that we can package it up more effectively as well. And I think what we've tried to do through SEPA's Waste campaign is look at how different FMPs, or fixed monetary penalties, for slightly different offences work well together to be able to tackle fly tippers more effectively. And that in the future can help us try and address some of the core issues and some of the individuals who have been involved and tackle that more effectively, as well as the proposals that are mentioned in the strategy itself.
Thanks for that, Craig. I don't know whether Sarah would have any kind of additional thoughts to add to that in terms of the strategy perspective.
I think Craig summed it up really well. But yeah, I would agree that I think it is really important to look at these themes together, and that we, all these actions need to work together to tackle litter and fly tipping effectively. That we can't just rely on one of those being a deterrent.
So kind of combined approach. So I think probably one of the last question that before we go to some of the questions raised from the viewers just now, the disclosure program, Dirty Business, highlighted a fairly bleak situation with fly tipping, particularly the involvement of organised crime groups. Can we actually stop these groups from fly tipping and disposing of waste? I wonder, Craig, if you have any thoughts with regards to that.
Yeah, so I think in our opinion, there's a couple of different levels highlighted in the programme. So one of the things that you see is large-scale unauthorised disposal of waste by organised crime groups. I think these situations are far more complex than what the strategy could adequately address. And I think the programme tried to highlight that as well in terms of its connections with other crimes, and how fly tipping is just one aspect of that organised crime group's overall operating procedure, you could say. And I think some of that is more adequately tackled through partnership working, such as the Serious Organised Crime Task Force. I think the other area, particularly if you're thinking about the gasworks that's highlighted in the programme, so that is an area that's blighted by several smaller loads of fly tipping. I think that's where the strategy could really make a difference in terms of the proposals put forward. So stuff like vehicle seizure, improved information sharing, etc. In terms of actually being able to tackle that business head on. I think one of the best things we can do to actually try and prevent the waste falling into their hands in the first place, and everyone has a role to play in that. So checking where the person you're giving your waste to has a waste carrier's license, or checking where it's going, can be effective measures, and just highlighting that you are aware of what's going on. I think also by tackling this latter group more effectively, we can actually free up resource to address some of those organised crime groups that you see in the other area of the programme, and deal with the larger scale incidents. And one last point I would like to note, the digital waste tracking will also help make a difference in this regard, in terms of helping to highlight where the numbers don't quite add up. And that's something that is coming along in the future.
Thanks for that, kind of Craig. So we'll move on to some of the questions that have been received from our viewers kind of today. So the first one I'm going to ask is, how will my views be used in the consultation? So if anyone's going to submit kind of views to the consultation, how is that going to be used? I wonder whether Sarah, you could respond to that.
Yeah, I'm happy to respond. So after the consultation closes, we will be analysing all of the responses and using that to inform any sort of the final strategy itself. So it is, getting views is really valuable and important. The questions that we asked are within the consultation are specifically to help us understand people's views, and also I guess have a further understanding of maybe some of the challenges people face, and what they feel the priority is in terms of tackling these issues.
Okay, thanks for that, kind of Sarah. A question that comes in relation to the use of household waste recycling centres and fly tipping. Wouldn't making better use of the household waste recycling centres helps to stop fly tipping? And there's currently restrictions to business uses in place. So I guess there's a question about whether there's the potential to expand the use of household waste recycling centres. I wonder if maybe Craig or Paul would be able to share some thoughts with regards to that.
Yeah, so I think this kind of ties in quite nicely to one of the things that we tried to outline in consultation around that, you know, what's working for certain local authorities that might work elsewhere, or what have they tried and what was the barriers to it. Certainly with regards to business waste coming into household recycling centres, you know, business waste is separate. I understand that some local authorities will charge for that waste to go in and some just won't accept it. So I think it's different, obviously, to the household waste that would go into those recycling centres. But and there's certainly things to be explored around that as to whether it works in certain areas or why it doesn't work. I understand if those barriers are there for a reason or whether they can actually be overcome.
Okay, thanks for that, kind of Craig. So there's a couple of questions that relate to actually the panelists themselves. And the question that comes that is, could each of the expert panel please advise us just what their role is in relation to this issue? So I guess kind of litter and flytipping probably general and maybe specifically with regards to the consultation itself. And has anyone of you kind of worked in a street cleansing department, so kind of had that kind of experience from on the ground, as it were? So I wonder if anyone would like to kind of go first. Maybe Paul, would you like to start off?
Thanks, Chris. Interesting question, I suppose. I worked in local government for nearly 15 years at a senior level, and I was involved with colleagues in environmental services and developing and designing and helping to plan the delivery of services in that area. And that included looking at how we tackled issues of local environmental quality at a place-based level. So, you know, whether that was through the community planning process or through the work that we did with communities in terms of single outcome agreements. So a lot of that work was about getting out there and speaking to communities and understanding the issues and challenges they faced. And in the last 10 years, nearly, with Keep Scotland Beautiful, I've led the delivery of a number of national and regional and local campaigns, including the development of our community cleanup hubs and our citizen science programme and some of our award-winning campaigns. So I think I come at this from the perspective of Keep Scotland Beautiful, where we work with communities and we work with a range of partners, including local authorities. But I think one of the things that we all have to recognise and accept is that no one organisation and no one service can fix all these problems. And we're not going to fix them overnight. Local authority services are a crucial part of the mix. The environmental services teams across the country do a fantastic job, but they need to be helped, and that help needs to come from a range of different stakeholders, and that includes public agencies, it includes the government, it includes the third sector and people like ourselves, but it also includes communities. So I think the days of in the past when you know the council would come along and fix things are long past, and we have to recognise that we have a new reality now, and we all have a role to play in addressing that new reality.
Thanks for that, Paul. Maybe Kim, if you'd like to kind of go next. So in terms of your kind of role in relation to these issues, and if you've ever worked in a street cleansing department in the past.
Yeah, so Zero Waste Scotland's role in relation to the strategy is really about the data and the evidence sort of, you know, behind all this. We're using the litter monitoring system, which also monitors fly tipping, even though it's not in the name. But the idea being that the more data we have and the more evidence that we have, the better we are to target interventions. So that's the kind of angle that Zero Waste Scotland comes from. My own background, well, I've been with Zero Waste Scotland for 7 years now, and worked within the litter and fly tipping team for about four of those years. Previously, I worked for a local authority, Perth Kinross Council. I worked in their waste team. Waste and cleansing were separate, but we worked very closely with the cleansing department, and you know, one of the projects that I worked on involved rolling out the recycling services across Perth and Kinross. So going out there, you know, working with householders to ensure that we had a service that was fit for purpose, to ensure that people were able to dispose of their waste responsibly and appropriately. Another element I worked on was at the local recycling centre, and educating young people and giving them visits to the recycling centre to ensure that they too understood that you know, there's a place for your waste and recycling, and there's a place where it absolutely shouldn't be. Yeah, so that's my background.
Thanks for that, Kim. And maybe Craig, do you want to chime in next?
Yeah, so I don't have as much experience as Kim and Paul. I'll be honest with that. But I've been working for SEPA for the past 4.5 years now. Certainly the past 2 in waste policy, and involved in looking at fly tipping. But I think it's important to understand almost how our team works, I guess, with waste policy, and that we're often the voices of our local teams who are dealing with fly tipping investigations day in, day out. And I think part of our role is to understand their experiences and take some of that and build it into policy and strategies, into guidance documents, and as well as getting some of that experience ourselves in terms of going out with them. And in a previous role within SEPA, had gone out and looked at fly tipping incidents and seeing the reality of when you come across a pile of rubble, there's with very little else in it other than where it is, I guess. So I think it's important to grasp it's not always just individual, it's organisational knowledge within this. And I think SEPA does have a wealth of that can be tapped into and provided into this.
Thanks for that, Craig. And then finally, Sarah, do you want to share your thoughts in terms of your role in this?
Yeah, so I guess my background specifically, I've been in government for a few years. I originally joined as a statistician, so I have quite a lot of interest on sort of the data side of things. But I've been working in the zero waste unit for nearly 2 years now. But before joining government, I was in research, and my research focused on I guess human impacts in the environment. So I specifically looked at chemicals and plastics, and I did a lot of work on sort of behavior change and encouraging people to behave more responsibly. But kind of as the others have said, I'm just one person in quite a large team and quite a large policy area within Scottish government, and my colleagues come from a range of backgrounds, many of which have worked in sort of various fields to do with waste. But one thing that's been really positive about this sort of partnership approach that we've taken between these 4 organizations is that there is a lot of different experience and knowledge that we're able to draw from. Everyone also has really good contacts and networks with everything to do with litter and fly tipping. And we've done a lot of work to try and engage and consult with people from a wide range of backgrounds, and really trying to get people from as many different sort of backgrounds and different types of stakeholders to respond to this consultation, as that's really important in developing our next steps.
Thanks for that, Sarah. So hopefully that was been useful to give a better understanding just in terms of who our panelists and just the range of experience that they bring to this discussion and this kind of area of work as well. So we're coming on to just actually the last kind of question that we have received kind of today. It's a little bit of a 2-part one. So it says, I'd love to know if any of the panelists go litter and fly litter picking themselves. And I guess a question for myself that I would specifically want to ask is, if you've been out kind of litter picking, what's the strangest item you've found in your times, as it were? So I guess a simple yes, no, if you kind of go litter picking kind of regularly, and if you do, what's the strangest, most unusual item you've ever found? So I don't know who would like to start us off. Maybe Kim?
Yeah, absolutely. I have my own litter picker that I take out when I go out with the dog, and so I'm the crazy lady that gets seen out in the street, wandering up and down. In terms of weird things, I think probably one which I found really odd was I found a can of I think it was Pepsi, that clearly was ancient because it had the old type of ring pool. So it had obviously been lying in the ditch for years and years and years. I don't know when those ring pools got phased out, but it must have been about 30 years ago. So that really surprised me that it managed to last for that long. And yeah, I think there's been a few weird ones, but I can't think off the top of my head. Certainly out doing community litter picks, there's been things like push chairs and random children's toys that have been pulled out of bushes and things like that. So but yeah, absolutely, I think litter picking is one of those things. It's almost one of your kind of entry point into getting involved with community engagement in your local area. Many community groups sort of run litter picks, and yeah, I've been on I don't know how many countless litter picks myself and with other organisations.
Thanks for that, Kim. And Paul, your kind of involvement and maybe strangest, most unusual item you find, perhaps?
I think both from a work perspective, we support cleanups across the country on a regular basis, and it's good to get out and engage both with businesses and with community groups and others who are taking part, and to hear their stories and see what they're doing. It is quite inspiring at times, some of the work that they do. I think from a personal perspective, I have 3 young children who are very enthusiastic amateur litter pickers, and quite often it's a good way to get them out and burn off some energy, to be honest, and also do some good at the same time. I think, like Kim, I've seen a wide and varied assortment of items, particularly on some of the work that we do along waterways, and surprised at some of the stuff that people will throw in rivers, and everything from household items and furniture to plastic bottles and cans. I think the thing that I find most unusual and sometimes most dispiriting is people who go to the effort of cleaning up after their dogs and decide then that the next thing they're going to do is hang it on a tree or a fence. It is really one of my pet hates, and it's wish something that people wouldn't do. But yeah.
Okay, thanks for that, Paul. And maybe Craig, on the same kind of question to yourself.
Yeah, so it seems to be a common theme. I've got a litter picker myself. I think we certainly started upping it in our local community during lockdown. It was a good way to get outside and to kind of just go around. I think there was, I suppose, an increase in litter, certainly in terms of my, where I stay and the flats surrounding it. In terms of unusual stuff, though, it's all been fairly generic. I must admit I haven't had anything too exciting. Bits of clothing that were oddly, as to whether that's been thrown away or dropped or what, but certainly not in the condition that anyone's wanting it back. But beyond that, it's almost getting into the fly tipping levels of suitcases and seats and chairs and someone's entire kitchen utensil set left outside, which was odd. So the joys of living in a flat, I guess.
Indeed. And finally, Sarah, yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I take part in just sort of casual litter picking as I'm walking to work, or more organized things within my community. The others probably don't know about me, but I do a lot of crafting, so I'm quite interested in sort of rescuing things that I find and upcycling that, whether it's furniture, or quite like to make like lamps out of old bottles and stuff like that. Because in terms of maybe some of the strangest things I find, so I do a lot of scuba diving, and there's some kind of like quarries and lakes that I've been in, and there's all sorts of like, it's quite horrifying actually, but all sorts of weird things that people dump in, and it's everything from like actual cars or boats to kind of smaller like children's toys. And sort of as Kim said, like there's sometimes you can see things that were definitely kind of toys from the 90s, or and they are still down there.
Okay, that's great. Thanks for that. It's quite a wide and various experience. I guess I can share for myself. I used to, when I used to cycle to kind of work, the kind of fairly long commute between Falkirk and Stirling, I would sometimes see items on the road in the verge that I kind of just start to term as vegetarian roadkill. So I think the most unusual one I saw was just kind of food stuff that was on the side of the road. I saw like a red onion that had a chunk of a bite bitten out of it, so a bit like someone thinking it looks like an apple with a chunk bitten out of it, and it was just there on the road as I cycled past on the way to work. So that's probably the most unusual piece I have seen. So thanks everyone for taking part from the panelists. We're coming to the end of the session just now. We've kind of gone through all the kind of questions that have been submitted in advance and all the questions that I think we submitted as the session was running just now. So if anyone is wanting to access the consultation that we've been talking about just now, I'll just read out a website, and that's where you can access it from. I think, as Sarah has mentioned before, the consultation runs until the 31st of March, so make sure you can add your responses to that. So the website is zws.scot/litter-flytipping. So you'll be able to get access to the consultation there, and also the recording from today's session will be made available to there to watch afterwards again. So I'll just read that website once more. So it's zws.scot /litter-flytipping. And if you have any further questions, then please continue to send them via the social media channels that you're viewing just now, and we'll look to get back to you as quickly as possible. For now, I'd just like to thank my colleague Kim and the panelists here, Sarah from the Scottish Government, Craig from the Scottish Environment Protection Agency, and Paul from Keep Scotland Beautiful for their time with us this day. And also thanks everyone who's been watching and contributing today to today's session. Thanks just now, and we'll leave it there. Goodbye.